Some people wake up at 5 a.m., drink lemon water, journal about gratitude, and somehow still have the emotional energy to enjoy the sunrise. Night owls wake up at 5 a.m. too. The difference is that for us, it's because we still haven't slept yet. And for some reason, society has decided that this makes us the problem. Apparently, if you're not naturally functioning like a Victorian milkman, you're lazy, undisciplined, or my personal favorite, just sleep earlier. Ah yes, the classic sleep advice equivalent of telling a depressed person to simply try being happy. Because here's the thing people don't understand. Your sleep schedule is not always a motivational issue. Sometimes it's literally your chronotype, which is just the scientific way of saying your body clock decided long ago whether you were going to be one of the early birds who somehow enjoy mornings or one of the night owls who achieve consciousness around 11:47 a.m. And unfortunately, this is not just vibes. This is genetics. A massive study published in Nature Communications looked into the DNA analysis of nearly 700,000 people pulled from a huge UK research database. And it turns out your hatred of mornings may be deeply embedded in your genome, which is honestly great news. Because now instead of blaming ourselves, we can blame our ancestors. Maybe somewhere in the evolutionary chain, your family line specialized in staying awake late to watch the cave entrance for wolves. Meanwhile, the morning person genes were probably the ones getting up early to invent agriculture and passive aggression. The researchers identified hundreds of genetic markers linked to chronotype, and these genes weren't random either. A lot of them were involved in circadian rhythms, neurons, and even retinal tissue, which is huge because your retina helps regulate light exposure, which basically resets your internal clock every day. So when sunlight hits your eyes in the morning, it's supposed to tell your brain, hey champ, time to become a productive member of society. But if your genes are wired differently, your brain instead hears, interesting, let's revisit consciousness around lunchtime. That's why night owls can go to bed at 10 p.m. and still lie there staring at the ceiling like they're waiting for software updates. The problem isn't always bad sleep habits. Sometimes the hardware itself shipped with a different operating system. And this is where mornings become a war crime, because the modern world was clearly designed by early birds. School starts at 8. Corporate meetings happen at 9. Gym influencers are somehow posting already crushed my workout selfies before sunrise. Meanwhile, your circadian rhythms are still trying to load basic motor functions. This mismatch between your natural chronotype and forced routine is where the real suffering starts. Because the actual issue isn't necessarily being a night owl. It's being a night owl trapped inside an early bird economy. That's what the study's causation analysis found so interesting. Using advanced statistics, researchers were able to separate pure genetics from non-genetic factors like work stress, alarm clocks, doom scrolling, and the deeply spiritual act of watching just one more video at 2:30 a.m. And what they found was kinda brutal. Being genetically aligned as a morning person was linked with better well-being and lower risks of depression and schizophrenia. Which sounds bad for us until you realize this may say more about the structure of society than your biology. Because if your natural sleep timing constantly fights school, work, and sunlight, of course your brain starts filing complaints. Imagine living your entire life in permanent social jet lag. That's basically the night owl experience. What's surprising though is the study didn't strongly support the idea that chronotype directly causes obesity or type 2 diabetes. Which is weird because people have blamed late sleepers for those outcomes forever. Turns out it may be less about your genes and more about the lifestyle side effects. If you wake up exhausted, skip breakfast, slam caffeine, stress eat at midnight, and survive on delivery food because your productive hours begin when restaurants are closing, that's less evil genetics and more modern civilization is incompatible with your species. So the health risk may come from the environment around night owls, not the chronotype itself, which honestly feels like being falsely accused by biology. But the story gets worse. Because once you're tired all the time, people start compensating. And this is where humanity's favorite terrible idea enters the chat, nicotine. Especially through vaping, e-cigarettes, and those neon-colored vape pens that look less like medical devices and more like USB sticks for poor decision-making. A lot of people use nicotine to brute force alertness in the morning, which works. In the same way, borrowing money from a loan shark technically solves your short-term cash flow problem. Researchers from the School of Medicine at the University of Kansas in Wichita analyzed a huge health survey and found troubling links between vaping and increased cardiovascular risk. We're talking elevated chances of stroke, heart attack, and coronary heart disease. Which is awkward because vaping was originally marketed as the healthy alternative to tobacco smoking, which is kind of like calling deep-fried butter the healthy alternative to cheesecake. Sure, maybe. But the bar was underground. Now, to be fair, there's an important confounding factor here. A lot of vapors are also cigarette smokers, which makes it hard to isolate whether the risk comes from vaping itself, the nicotine, previous smoking damage, or the broader cluster of bad health behaviors that often come with chronic sleep deprivation. Because when your mornings already feel like a medically supervised resurrection, adding stimulants can quickly snowball into dependence. And yes, addiction remains the undefeated champion here, especially since nicotine products exploded among middle school students and high school students who were promised mango-flavored productivity and instead got chemically enhanced anxiety. There's also growing concern around flavoring toxicity, because it turns out inhaling Blue Raspberry Ice Tornado was never something human lungs evolved for. Who could have guessed? Now, some of this remains preliminary research, often first shown at a scientific conference before peer review tears it apart or validates it. So no, it doesn't automatically prove vaping causes every problem on Earth. But from a public health perspective, it adds to a growing pile of evidence that using nicotine to patch a broken sleep system is maybe not the elite strategy. The real tragedy is that most night owls are not broken. They're just biologically optimized for a world that no longer exists. A world where being awake late meant guarding the tribe, watching firelight, and probably inventing storytelling. Now it means accidentally learning obscure facts at 3 a.m. and then suffering through an 8 a.m. Zoom meeting like a Victorian ghost. If mornings feel impossible, there's a decent chance your genetics, circadian rhythms, and light exposure patterns are all conspiring against you. Not because you're lazy, not because you lack discipline, but because your chronotype is real, your body clock is stubborn, and society keeps insisting productivity begins at sunrise. For night owls, the struggle isn't waking up. It's waking up in a world built by people who think 6 a.m. is a personality trait. And honestly, that might be the most exhausting part. So yeah, if mornings make you feel like your soul is still buffering, there's a decent chance it's not just bad habits. It might be your chronotype, your genetics, your circadian rhythms, and the fact that society was apparently designed by people who think jogging before sunrise is a personality. For night owls, the real struggle isn't sleep. It's trying to force a perfectly functional brain into a world that starts way too early, which is honestly less a personal flaw and more a long-running conflict between biology and capitalism. So the next time someone tells you to just sleep earlier, remember that your body clock may literally be running on a different factory setting. And if you enjoyed this casually overanalyzed attack on mornings, do us a favor. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you can continue ruining your sleep schedule with us every week. Because statistically speaking, if you're watching this at 2 a.m., you were never sleeping anyway. See you in the next one.